Good afternoon, everyone. It's yours truly, Dr. Berry, your host of the Lunch and Learn with Dr. Berry, which is not only a live stream as you're watching right now, but it's also the podcast, which is coming out tomorrow, which it used to be coming out Thursdays, but now it's coming out Wednesdays because I wanted to kind of follow up what we do with the live stream on the video front. So first of all, thank you for those who joined, those who will be catching the replay later. Again, you guys' support so much appreciated here on this and today we're gonna have a tough decision, right? Tough discussion, I should say, right? Today we're gonna be talking about something that's kind of come up a lot more frequently for me, especially because I've been doing inpatient medicine. Again, unless you've been kind of under a rock, you know, I went from the outpatient clinic physician that now I'm a program director, and I do mainly inpatient hospital medicine. And it's a discussion that's been coming up much more frequently than I would have to deal with on an outpatient side. And it's really the discussion of how to talk to not only your patients, but talk to family as well, right? Like how to talk to them when it gets to the point when, you know, their family members may not make it, or when this person, if I'm speaking to the patient specifically, may not make it, right? And like, how do we deal with that as a physician, and how do you, the friends of the family or the patient's family, kind of like help kind of internalize that and kind of, you know, be able to make that next step, right? And I think the grand scheme of like what's been kind of like really been pushing a lot of this drive. Again, we got a few friends of mine who started, hey, Dr. Jarrett, who's been doing medicine for quite a while, right? And, you know, I'm seeing a lot more articles, right, just kind of based on physician depression, based on physician suicide, and, you know, a lot of the stress that, you know, we as a professional community have seen to be taken on, right? And I think a lot of that kind of stems from like these discussions, right? It stems from the fact that a lot of times we are usually the first person who has to let a person know, right, that the end result that they're looking for is not going to happen, right? And I tell patients all the time, especially in the hospital, I tell my students, my residents as well, just because you come in the hospital, right, through the ER, you are not guaranteed to leave, right? And that's sometimes a tough pill to swallow, especially for medical students, because, you know, when you're in medical school, you know, you're a little naive, you know, you think that, you know, you're going to save everybody. And it's usually not until you get to that hospital setting and you realize, like, you know what, like, I can do everything to the best of my ability, and that still not be enough, right? And I want to kind of talk about like the first time that happened to me, especially as a medical student, as a medical resident. I was a PGY2, so I was a second year medical resident, and, you know, we had been taking care of this patient for, you know, about a week or so in the hospital, and we were ready to let them go. Like, we had called family, we let family know, like, hey, your family member is ready to go home. And somehow, so again, I don't like to, mess with the plan, hand to God, but, something happened, and in the middle of the patient's family leaving home to come pick their family member up, and by the time they got there, the patient passed away, right? It was a very, very sad case. And what made it worse, right? What made it like even more significant, which is why this is probably something it's probably a scenario I never will forget, is I could tell it because I could see the family member kind of walking down the hallway, but I could see that no one had told the family member yet, right? Like, because they were just smiles, everything kind of happy-go-lucky, right? And here we are, we were doing all we can to kind of save this family member's life, but I could see that they didn't know what the result was. So I had to, I was a second year medical resident, and one thing I do thank my, hold on a second. One thing I do thank, one thing I do thank my attendings for doing is really, pushing us to be the physician, like right from the beginning, right? So it wasn't a decision that I had to leave up to my attending. No, like it wasn't a discussion I had to let my attending do and I kind of sit behind and watch. No, they put us right in there, right in, the front lines. So I had to have, a discussion with this family for, about 10, 15 minutes that unfortunately, you're not going to be able to pick up, your family member because, they're not here anymore. And I can tell you, like, during my residency, I'd probably say like, I'm a lowball it, maybe like 25 to like 50 conversations, something in that manner. Like it seems like a lot, but I probably took care of during residency, like a couple thousand patients, right? So in the grand scheme of things, it's kind of small, but it's still a significant number, right? A significant number where the training of having to do that, right? Having to be able to calm yourself down, right? Because then that's again, unless you're like really like deaf, right? Like that's not a discussion that you're used to having, right? You're not used to having the discussion of, hey, your family member is not going to make it, or hey, your family member did not make it, right? That's usually not a discussion that's normally had. And being able to try to help control not only your own emotions, right, but control the emotions of the family, because it's not a one size fit all type thing, right? Like one family is going to react one way, whether they just be sad and somber. You have another family may react another way, where they're fighting and screaming and denial and all of these things here, and you kind of having to be the calming factor in it all, right? Like it's definitely something that unless you're like really like this is what you're built for, right? It's definitely not something that I encourage, but it is something that I always forewarn, especially my medical students, right? Because we've had scenarios where you go say hi or good morning to the patient, and by afternoon that patient's not there no more, right? And that's something that I think we almost become so accustomed to it. And in fact, I remember writing a blog post maybe like a year or so ago, when I talked about how we had this patient in the ICU. She was in the ICU, and she was very sick, and she didn't make it. And almost the finale of doing everything we can to do, including CPR and all these things under the sun. After doing all of those things, when it was done, we just kind of flipped the switch, and then we were about going on our day. But we had our medical student here who this was her patient, and this was the first time she experienced like someone like really close to her like passing away, and you could tell like it hurt her so hard. And I was like, oh man, like that was one of the first times I looked like, what, this isn't kind of normal, right? Like again, I think as a physician, we see a lot of the glitz, the glamour of being a physician, the high salaries and prestige and everything kind of under the sun. But sometimes I think we forget how much they deal with on the other end, right? On the other spectrum, right? Like think there's a stat that showed that a class size every year of physicians, commit suicide. And, that's tough, right? That's, and especially because I went to Nova Southeastern, we had a class size of like 240, right? So it's definitely something tough when you think about like, wow, like these many people who are probably pre-med stars, and they went to medical school, they did all the work in medical school and residency and all that, and still at the end, right, like that burden and grief and everything that was kind of gripping them wasn't enough. And I think, and for those who know, I'm a big proponent of mental health, and making sure your mental health is like correct, and making sure if you need help, you seek help, right? Like I'm a big proponent of that, because I understand as on a day-to-day basis, when I was doing outpatient medicine, was I the one who may have had to tell my patient, hey, you have colon cancer or breast cancer? Yeah. But at that point, right, it was still a, hey, you have this diagnosis, but we're going to do some treatment, right? But now that I'm on the inside, right, I'm inside these hospital walls, and by the time a patient gets to these hospital walls, again, it's not guaranteed that they're leaving, like I said. So a lot of times you're having this discussion where like, hey, you have so-and-so disease, and you're not leaving this bed, right? Like, and so that's that's tough, right? So that's tough, and I implore, and I implore especially all of my professionals who get into this career field, and the understanding that there's always two sides, right? There's always two sides of this conversation of having to deal with it, right? Because it's not just the patient or the patient's family has to deal with it. I think the physician and the mental health counselor and the social worker and everybody else who has to be the one who has these conversations. And I list these conversations a lot of times. Family members, right? As a family member, sometimes you have to talk with your family members about end of life care and what are you going to do when so and so happens, right? Because that's something that doesn't happen often, right? And a friend of mine, Adam, he works at New York Life, and his big thing is making sure that we work on establishing a generational wealth, right, within our community, right? And I say our community, African American community. And one of the biggest things he talks about is, the fact that a lot of us, don't have life insurance, and we don't pursue life insurance, and we don't even try to broach the subject. And why don't we do that? Because again, a lot of us don't even like having the discussion of the end of life, right? We don't even like to have that discussion. So that's not a discussion that we even try to we don't even we just table it until it can't be tabled no more. And for some people that can be very detrimental, and it can be very dramatic, because again, if you don't have that discussion, right, or if you don't attempt to have that discussion, when the inevitable does happen, because it will, right? And I think we need to understand that, tax and death, right? They're coming. You can't hide from those, right? And if you don't have that discussion before it occurs, this could be very traumatic, especially to a family where, let's say the main breadwinner, something happens and they pass away. And you've never had that discussion about end of life. You've never had that discussion about, what do we do if so-and-so happens, right? That could be, devastating to a family. So again, I'm a big proponent of, just having that discussion and talking it out, right? Because I think if you follow me by now, we're on episode 49 of this, the Lunch and Learn with Dr. Barry, right? I have no problem talking, right? I do this every single day, talk all the time. They pay me to talk. That's what the goal is. I'm not a interventional radiologist or one of these people who do a lot of procedures. No, majority of the stuff I do is just talking. So I love doing it. So I think we have to be very mindful, right? We gotta, just like I'm gonna talk to you about your diabetes and your high cholesterol, and I'm gonna tell you stop smoking cigarettes and all those other things here. I gotta let you know, hey, you know what? Grandma and grandpa, they're kind of getting up in age. Have you kind of discussed what happens, when that occurs? Are you, things like organ donor, things like, again, life insurance. Again, I'm a big thing about life insurance. Things about having a will in general. I can't tell you how many people, especially in this hospital, in the hospital setting, right, will come to the hospital and they're very ill, very sick, and none of the family members knows what that family member would want to do if so-and-so happened, right? If they're really ill, do they want to have a tube, in their mouth to help them breathe, right? Do they want to be fed through a tube? These are discussions that I think we need to have. But I think what happens is, because we make the topic of, the end of life, the topic of the grief that's kind of associated with it, almost taboo, especially in our community. Not to say that it doesn't happen in everybody's community, but I see it a lot in ours, the African American community. Because we kind of make it taboo, we don't even have it. And that's something that, I want to really put out there and be on the forefront of stopping today, if possible. Tomorrow I'm actually going to be doing a podcast with my wife, and for those who've been following me know I think I quote her all the time, right? She's a licensed mental health therapist. She very specialty in grief and loss. So we're going to be talking about her about how does she deal with the family members who, after someone like me has let them know that, your grandpa, mom, dad, someone is passed away or is going to pass away. What do they deal with that? How does the family members deal with the aftermath surrounding it, right? So, very, very, very important podcast episode tomorrow about that. But I think it's key, right? I think as a physician, one, we have to know our limits, right? Because like that's the first and foremost, right? When we start thinking about like, well, hey, Dr. Berry, how do I have this conversation? And again, I say physician because I'm just talking in general, but again, I could be talking to regular Joe Blow who's watching this, right? Like, how do I have this conversation with my mom? How do I have this conversation with my dad? Like, how do I have this conversation of, if something happens, right? Like, what do you want to do, right? And for some people, you have to be very blunt, right? You have to be very like dead on, like boom, like, hey, if you pass, like what am I gonna do next, right? Like who has the papers, right? Where's the paperwork at? Like some of you, your parents and your family members have a will and you don't even know where it's at, right? Like we've ran into that in hospital setting plenty of times where no one knows where the affairs are at, right? Because again, let's say the grandma was one who kind of took care of that. She got her life insurance. She did all these things here, but she, because no one actually talked to her and said, hey, this is where so-and-so paper's at. You never even had that discussion until it's fortunately too late, right? And I can tell you right now, and I've been on both sides, right? I've been on both sides. You don't want to have to make these types of decisions when you're forced to, right? You want to be able to kind of sit down, everybody's calm, everyone's healthy, everyone's relaxed, and say like, all right, what is the game plan if, so this happens, right? Because it's going to happen, right? Like, I think it's important to understand that once we get over the fact that it's going to happen, right? Once we get over the fact that it's going to happen, then it's easier to have these conversations, right? But we can't have the conversations because we just kind of tiptoe and just kind of go at the road for it, right? So we got to say like what, we got to be able to understand to when we start the how of these things, we got to say like the why. The why is going to be the most important for everything. I had an attending, my internal medicine attending, he told me the only and the most important PIM question you'll ever know is the why, right? Like, as if you know the why, then all of the PIM questions will fall in line. And that's why, and that stuck with me like forever, right? Still stuck with me now. If you don't understand the why that we're having a discussion, then you'll never be able to have it. So we've talked about the why. Like, why do I need to have this difficult discussion, with my mom, with my grandpa, with my patient? Why do I need to have this difficult discussion? You need to have it because we want you to be prepared. Because I've seen far too many times in the outpatient world, inpatient world, when the lack of preparation, causes way more grief and strife than it needs to be. Again, we talked about how big mental health is, right? Suffering from loss, suffering from the grief of an impending loss, right, is enough, right? Like that's enough mental strain, right? We don't need to add on additional strain by having to rush and try to plan and try to get these things in affairs order because we weren't ready to do that. We don't want, so preparation is key, right? So that's the why, right? Because I want you to be prepared when it happens, right? And again, I want to stress it's going to happen. Everyone's going to die. Everyone's going to get taxed. Boom. Like those, once you kind of take that deep breath and say that's going to happen, we just go to the next step. So I want you to be prepared for that to occur. 2, the how. I always want you to do it either within a group setting or with someone who feels comfortable doing it. Because it's key, right? Because again, I can tell you right now, most of your physicians, right, and I say physicians, or most of your physicians, because we've been kind of trained to do it. Unfortunately, most of your physicians are kind of trained to deal with death. They just are, especially your internal medicine, your family medicines, even your peds sometimes, which is unfortunate. Most of us are trained to deal with that, but so are your counselors, your mental health physicians, your social workers, all these people who, are in a field where they understand that the results may not always, work in our favor. Like, go to someone who is able to take what you want to know and kind of get you to that end point, right? Because trying to get you to the point where, again, why? Because till you're prepared and, from that standpoint, right? And when we talk about what is the right time, right? So number 3, when is the right time to have this discussion? Have it tomorrow. Have that thing tomorrow. because you never know. Like I said, one thing, again, I think fortunate for us is that we know when we're supposed to get taxed, right? But we don't know when that end of life is coming, right? We don't know when the end of life is coming for our mom, our dad, our grandpa, our uncle, our brother. So we don't know when it's coming. So have that discussion like tomorrow for you, right? And let me see. And I think, because I had some points here, I just want to make sure I touch them all today. Like I said, this is I don't want to say a somber discussion, because we've had some other somber ones, but I think it's probably one of the most important ones we've done, right? Because again, I've just seen it in like the past couple of weeks, quite too often, right? I've seen, another friend's family member looks like was diagnosed with cancer. I've seen another friend's family members, pass away from a stroke. Like, these are things, this is happening, right? Life is happening, whether we like it or not. So I want you guys to be prepared, right? So again, if I don't prepare you, right, I don't know who will, and that's how I like to think about these things, right? If I'm not the one saying, do this versus do that, I don't think anyone else would do it. Let me make sure I got anything. Make sure I'm not missing something. And I think, I think that's about it, right? Like I said, we're not gonna, we're not gonna be too sad today. Hold on, let me make sure I got all my questions. I think that's all right. Yeah. So that was boom, boom, boom. Okay. Yeah. So that's it, right? So again, recap. Like, what's the difficult discussion, right? Dr. Pierre wants you to make sure, Dr. Barry wants to make sure, you have, that discussion with your doctor. You want to make sure you have that discussion with your health counselor or somebody, or your family, just your family member, right? Just have that discussion. Because I think that's the most important thing, right? Like, having the discussion is what starts it all off, right? And why do I want you to have that discussion? Because I want you to be prepared. Again, I want you to be prepared for the inevitable to happen. And if you're prepared for the inevitable to happen, then you're not running frantic, and you're not causing undue stress and angst when you can avoid it. Let me see. No. Right. Okay. So let me see. Appreciate that. Okay. I just making sure we didn't have any. Facebook changed like the way these comments kind of come up, so I had to like, okay, all right. Oh, appreciate you joining. So I mean, that's really the key here, right? Like I said, it's something that I feel is important, right? I feel it's something that, like, especially for our community, it's a discussion that we don't have, right? And let's just think about that, right? Like, if you've been catching my Lunch and Learns for a minute, right? Like, let's think about like if any community, right? Like I said, let's be practical, right? If any community is going to have end of life discussion, like, it should be the African American community, right? Let's think about this, right? We are the most likely the one who are going to die from coronary artery disease, from cancer, from obesity. Like, we are like if any community is going to have the discussion on end of life care and be prepared for it, like, it should be us, right? Like, if I said, Dr. Barry, if you ask me, Dr. Barry, who's the one community that you want to make sure is talking about end of life and preparing for end of life, and whether that be, funeral arrangements, life insurance, whatever that, or like, going home ceremonies, whatever that conversation is, right? If you had to decide who was the community that should have it, it should be the African American community, right? Because we do not do well, right? We just don't do well when it comes to morbidity and mortality, right? We're usually last place in a lot of these diseases, right? When you look at the people who die from heart disease, we're the most, right? When you look at the people who die from complications of diabetes, we're the most, right? When you look at people who die from strokes and end-stage renal disease and dialysis, we're the most, or we're topping the most, right? So if not anything, right? If you don't get anything from here, I always like to be practical about these things, right? If you don't get anything from here, understand that Dr. Pierre wants y'all talking about end of life care, because he understands that the most likely people who are going to need it, right? The most likely people who are going to need it is going to be us, right? In fact, because my friend actually just posted. That's why I like the live stream. We got time, so this. He actually just posted something that I wanted to. Let me get his facts here. So this is his word, right? This is Adam from New York Life, right? Who also does my shameless plug. He did my life insurance as well too. He says that it would take 228 years, right, to close the racial wealth gap. Like, think about that, right? It's going to take 228 years to close the racial wealth gap. And one of the biggest reasons why is because we don't have this discussion on what are we going to do when, not if, when we pass, right? Like, what are we actually going to do, right? We don't have this discussion. And because we don't have this discussion, we're passing, we're being, it's setting us back generations, right? Again, 228 years, right? And apparently, New York Life, has raised $50 billion in tax-free wealth transfer, which is pretty much like the life insurance and everything, right? So New York Life raised looks like $50 billion, right, in this tax transfer for the black community, and we are still looking like 200 plus years like behind. So like if just me talking to you doesn't get you motivated, right, to do this, understand that we are set back generations on top of generations because we don't have this discussion, right? This is not a discussion that's only costing you, right? I have 3 kids. I've got 3 nieces and nephews. I got some godchildren out there too, and shout out to the godparents. Like, first, just on random thought, like, I'm a terrible godparent because I always forget like their birthdays, but that, like, not here to there, right? Like, I have a lot of people, right, who are under, I guess, the tree that is affected by me, right? Like if I pass away during this live stream, hopefully I don't. But if I pass away during this live stream, right, I know that all of those people are taken care of. Like, there's not going to be a worry in the world. I know every single one of those folks are taken care of, right? And that's what's important, right? And that's why I want you guys to have this discussion. And that's why I want you to go talk to your doctor tomorrow. Go talk to your counselor tomorrow. Say, hey, Dr. Berry says I need to get like a will. Dr. Berry says I need to get a health will, a health surrogate. Dr. Berry says I need to be prepared one way, shape, or form. Again, you don't got to get, I want you to get life insurance, but you don't got to get life insurance. I just want you to have, especially in my setting, I just want you to have the discussion, period, right? Like, just have the discussion and then let's let it go from there, from that regard, right? So, again, we're not keeping you here too long. Again, this is a more serious, but I think they're all serious, but this is one of the more serious topics that we've done on Lunch and Learn, episode 49. We talked about how to have that difficult discussion on, when it comes to like death, because it's coming, like how to have that discussion and what do we need to do and why do we need to do it and when do we need to do it, right? We talk about all these things. Boom, boom, boom. Watch the video later, replay, and when you see it later. And then tomorrow's podcast will be with Maria Davis Pierre, licensed mental health counselor, specializing in grief and loss. Also happens to be my wife. So, very special podcast episode for you guys tomorrow. So I'm about to get back to work. You guys have a great, blessed day. I'm going to see y'all later. Bye.